All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair, and this is State of the Braves. Well, guys, a lot has happened since the last time I spoke with you guys. Just a few days ago, the Braves had lost 6 straight games. Max Fried was on the IL. Ronaldo Lopez was leaving the game, after 3 innings. Looked like, maybe he is headed for Tommy John surgery. Had some tightness in his forearm, which is just never good news. It was truly the low point of the season. At least we hope it was the low point of the season in New York against the Mets. 2 ugly losses to start that series. And man, everything looked so bad. Snicker was even visibly upset, right? So all that was going on. On top of that, the Braves had yet to do anything on the trade market when it was just so obvious that they need to do something, especially in the outfield. So it was a tough time for the Braves and for us Braves fans. So while the Braves, I'm going to look back and really talk about primarily what they did at the trade deadline this time around. And while they weren't near as active as many would have liked, probably as I would have liked either, they did end up bringing back 2 very familiar faces in outfielder DH Jorge Solair and reliever Luke Jackson. Of course, 2 members of the 2021 World Series team. Solair, of course, the World Series MVP. So Braves fans certainly know these two, especially Solair and his exploits. And he was one of those outfielders the Braves went and got when they remade their outfield in 2021. It all worked out so well. So we can only hope that this reacquisition of Solair will turn out just as well. In the same time period, uh, since I've been since I've been with you guys last, and since the trade deadline has passed, the Braves have bounced back in a big way. They won 5 out of their last 6 games against the Mets, Brewers, in the first game of the series against the Marlins. I'm coming to you guys on Friday, and they'll play 3 more with the Marlins this weekend. The Braves have definitely bounced back, and in the same time period, the Phillies have actually had their worst stretch all season. So as it stands today, the Braves are 6 games out of first in the NL East. This is the closest they've been in quite a while. It's really seemed to stick at 9.5, 8.5 game lead for the Phillies. So getting it down to 6, even though that's still a pretty big margin, feels a lot better, and it feels manageable. At least feels realistic that the Braves, if they're able to put things together here in the last 50 some games of the season, they might be able to catch them. And not that that is the primary need. We know that the positives and negatives of winning the NL East, that whole 5 days off and all that. The main thing is that the Braves are playing and firing on all cylinders and are healthy going into the postseason, and of course getting into the postseason, which after those first 2 in New York, you start doubting whether the Braves are even going to make it into the postseason. So this stretch has been very good and very encouraging for the Braves. All right, so some very encouraging signs have definitely emerged at this time. Max Fried and Ronaldo Lopez apparently are both healthy and ready to come back any day now. We have Matt Olson, who has suddenly found his power stroke again and looks as good as he has all season. Orlando Arcia has come back to life, um, which has been a real surprise. And so that's been great. Anytime you can get offense from Arcia, you'll take it. Spencer Schwellenbach had his best big league start of his career in his last start, suddenly kind of showing signs that this guy might really be legit. He might be able to stick in the rotation, and that's huge for the Braves. Charlie Morton has been really iffy as of late. He got the win last night, but there's no major confidence that the 40-year-old is going to be able to turn back the clock much anymore this season. So Schwellenbach is really important, and is looking really good right now. And maybe more important than anything, it just looks like the pall that was hanging over this team maybe has finally lifted. A sliver of hope has pierced the dark cloud that has been hanging over this team for so long. So that, just from a psychological standpoint, I think is really big. Of course, you got to win games, and that's a big reason why that turns around. But they certainly have been, and I'll talk more about it in this episode. But the Braves have a very favorable schedule over the next couple weeks, while the Phillies have a pretty tough one. So on paper, and of course that's always a dangerous thing to say, but on paper, it looks like as the Braves seem to be turning the tide a little bit, they have some games that are incredibly winnable. All right, so the first thing I want to focus on in this episode is the trade deadline. Again, the Braves only made one trade, sending injured Braves hero Tyler Matzik to San Francisco, along with third base prospect Sabine Ceballos, for old buddy Jorge Solair and another old buddy Luke Jackson. It is kind of funny to me that almost every move that Anthopoulos has made this year has just been turning back the clock to 2021. It is what it is. I mean, we obviously know these guys. He knows them. He appreciates them. He values them. Um, and I'll get into that aspect of this deal in a minute too. But before I move on, let me just take a minute to appreciate the contributions of Tyler Matzik one more time. His career has been so strange. It looks like he had one moment of glory sandwiched in between a career full of struggle and injury. You guys probably know the early part of his career. He had I don't know if a mental breakdown is the right word, but he's talked about it openly that he had some mental struggles, basically got the yips as a pitcher, totally lost command, totally lost all of his confidence, had to work back through all of that stuff. I think was pitching all the way down in indie ball when the Braves gave him another chance. He had been a very high pitching prospect with the Rockies before that. And of course, he comes back and has just such a huge part to play in the 2021 World Series team. And then, basically gave it all because it blew out his elbow. Tommy John has really not been the same pitcher yet coming back from that. So, man, I'm definitely pulling for him to be able to come back and have some kind of major league career post Tommy John surgery, but we'll see. He's not super young guy anymore. Braves certainly have given him chances, so they're going to send him to San Francisco. I don't know if he'll have a legit chance with the Giants to do much, but I'll certainly be pulling for him that he will. But he'll always be considered a Brave, right? He'll always be considered a great Brave who really had huge moments and a big part to play in the Braves winning that World Series. I also really liked Sabine Ceballos as a prospect. I mentioned him in I did a prospect podcast this offseason, and he was on my list of some of my favorite prospects for the Braves. Very intriguing guy, with I think a good hit tool and some high upside. But he was still pretty far down in the minors, still quite a ways to go and unproven. So in terms of actual prospect cost or cost generally of what the Giants got, they really got very little. This is in some ways just a salary dump, I think, on their part to send Solair and Jackson back to the Braves. The benefit there is the Braves just had to give up very little in prospect capital, and of course, they're not wealthy in prospect capital right now, so that is probably why this deal got done, and Anthopoulos looked at this type of deal at the deadline. Now, even though the Braves are taking on a fair amount of salary from Solair in 2025 and 2026, and Jackson at least in 2025, Anthopoulos has actually reported that the Braves have not and are not going over the third salary tax threshold. On the surface, when this deal was done, most people were assuming that the Braves were definitely going over that tax threshold, which was a little surprising. But he obviously Anthopoulos has accounting figures that we don't. So I don't really need to know the ins and outs of that. I'll trust him on that one. And it is good news that this deal will not bring the Braves over that tax threshold, because it would have meant that the Braves 2025 draft slot would have slid back 10 spots. So obviously that is, that hurts you a good bit in terms of who you can go and get in the first round of the draft. So that's not going to happen. Now, let's actually get into the merits of adding Jackson and especially Solair. I'm really going to focus mostly on Solair in this episode, but let me just address Luke Jackson briefly. Jackson required Tommy John surgery in early 2022 when he was still with the Braves. You guys might remember that. Uh, so he didn't pitch obviously the rest of that year. He signed a 2-year deal with the Giants the next offseason, and that included a 3rd-year option as well. So Jackson will make about $2 million next season, which if he returns to form, that's actually a really good deal, a really good discount for the Braves. His 2026 club option is for $7 million. So I feel like that's almost guaranteed to be declined, even if he pitches out of his mind in 2025. Uh, okay, so I'm certain that Jackson is a guy the Braves see as an above average arm. At the very least, from the right side, he can provide you middle relief innings. Um, and maybe more importantly to the Braves, he is known for being a really big glue guy, especially in that bullpen. Known for being beloved in the clubhouse, likable guy, funny guy, keeps things loose. And for a team that needs an injection of positivity and maybe loosen things up a little bit, Jackson is a guy that I think moving forward is important to add to the clubhouse. That is impossible. There's no analytics you can provide to that and that sort of thing. But I do know in that 2021 season, he was credited a lot in that bullpen of being a really key piece. Him and AJ Minter are like best friends, all that sort of thing. So I think there is some benefit to Jackson. Him pitching well will obviously be of great benefit. Hopefully that happens. Um, but he certainly does provide something in the clubhouse. Okay, so let's move on to Solair. So Jorge Solair was not on my list. My last episode, guys, was I gave you 8 outfielders that I thought the Braves could target at the trade deadline. Of course, they didn't go for any of them. They go for a guy that wasn't on my list. So Solair was not on my top 8 outfielder list that I wanted the Braves to target. That is not because I didn't like Solair. I kind of looked over him because for a few reasons. Number one, I didn't think he was available. The Giants had just given him a 3-year contract. Number two, I didn't think the Braves would take on his contract, especially the 2 additional years of control. And number three, I wasn't sure the Braves would be comfortable with him playing the outfield full time. The other teams recently, the Marlins and the Giants, the teams he's been on, have been very reluctant to play him in the outfield. In fact, the Giants did not give him a single inning in the outfield this year. But according to Alex, the Braves have wanted Jorge back with the Braves since the 2022 trade deadline. And I would take Alex at his word on that. Though, that doesn't necessarily mean that Jorge was on the top of their list of trade deadline pieces. They might have had to pivot to him as a backup plan or as a second or third option. Of course, we'll never know that. It is a little weird for me. Alex says this. I believe him that the Braves have targeted him since the 2022 trade deadline. It just makes me wonder that initial decision. If you'll recall, the offseason after the World Series, the Braves had a decision, okay, which of these outfielders are we going to bring back? Is it going to be Eddie? Is it going to be Jorge? Is it going to be Jock? And they landed on Eddie. Now, that was the easy option because he was probably the cheapest option. I think he had, I'm trying to remember back. I'm not sure if he had an option on his contract or if they just signed him to a cheaper contract. Sorry, I'd have to go back and look at that. But he definitely was the cheapest option. And looking back, maybe not the best choice to make between those 3. Of course, I didn't mention Duvall either. Duvall hung around too for 2022. But if this is true and Alex has wanted to get Jorge back since this 2022 trade deadline, you just wonder, well, why didn't you just keep him in the first place? Why wasn't he your number one guy? And yeah, I kind of view him as the best of those 4 options. I think, keeping Jorge and Jock Peterson instead of the other 2 would have been actually my top thing. Okay, so anyways, so look, I do like this move for the Braves in some ways. Honestly, I'm in between though. I am in between um, in terms of this move for the Braves and bringing back Solaire. I think my top 3 options that I outlined in last episode would have been better fits for different reasons. Okay, so if you didn't see that episode, hey, go back and watch it. But Brent Rooker, Jesse Winker, and Jazz Chisholm were my top 3 targets for the Braves in that order. Now, Rooker didn't get traded, so maybe he wasn't available to begin with the A's. Jazz, of course, has gone to the Yankees and is just like constantly hitting home runs. Um, Now, but Jesse Winker, and with Jazz too, the Yankees did have to give up several good prospects. So again, maybe the Braves were in on Jazz and then just kind of weren't willing to give up as much. And maybe the Marlins didn't want to trade Jazz in division. Sometimes that's a thing too. So I kind of can't blame them too much on not picking him up, though I still kind of wish that had happened. Winker is still the one to me that made the most sense that for whatever reason the Braves didn't do. There has been some reports that Winker could be a little bit of a hard-headed guy in the clubhouse. That might be totally inaccurate. I don't know. But of course the Braves are sensitive to impacts in the clubhouse. So maybe that was a thing. So anyways, Winker goes to the Mets for very little. And he was a pure rental piece, left-handed hitter that I think that was a bigger need for the Braves. But obviously the Braves didn't go there. They went back to a guy they knew better, knew would be good in the clubhouse in Jorge Solair. So let me talk through what I see are the positives and negatives of adding Solair. I'll start with we'll do a pros and cons list. I'll start with the cons. Okay, so the cons, he's a streaky hitter, and at times that means he can disappear, sometimes for like 1 or 2 months on end. I mean, that was the case for him early this season with the Giants. He just was nothing for about a month and a half, and then he started rolling by mid-June. Number 2, he's another right-handed bat. Again, they are still much weaker against righties. Solaire is much better against lefties. So look, I think they're going to crush lefties when somebody throws a lefty at them. But when they're going against righties, I think this is again Winker a little better. Strikeout prone like the rest of the team. This team strikes out a ton. Solaire strikes out a lot. So I think you're still going to see some games with a ton of strikeout numbers. You're just hoping they hit a couple home runs with some guys on base and find some offense that way. Number 4, he doesn't offer a speed element. That's another real weakness of this team since Acuna went down, since Harris has been out. And so obviously Solair's not stealing any bases for you. And number 5, he's a subpar defender. Again, the Giants weren't even willing to put him in the outfield. I think the Braves think differently of him, that he can at least be okay out there. But he's also been injury prone in his career. So you're just really hoping that he stays healthy as you put him in the outfield. All right, so here's some pros. Okay, those are the cons. That makes me sound like really negative on Solaire. But there's some things I really like about him too. So number 1, Solaire at his best is a higher impact bat than most all the other bats that were moved at the trade deadline. Maybe he might be the best impact bat when he's going well. Number 2, he is a known commodity that fits well in the clubhouse. I've already kind of mentioned that one. Number 3, he provides high on-base ability, and this is a real weakness for the Braves. Now, Jesse Winker is like top 10 in on base. Again, that's another reason why I really liked him. Solair's not that good, but he has been consistently a pretty high on base guy for his career. He will definitely take some walks. Number 4, he can lead off because of that high on base number, and that pushes Kelenic down in the order, which I think is more appropriate. Even though Solaire hasn't gotten a hit in his first 2 starts back with Atlanta, I think you're seeing that lineup deepen a little bit at the back end, and there's some real positives to that. And then number 5, he is a legit upgrade over their current options. Now, that's not saying a whole lot, but it is true. And you can see how much better this lineup will be, already is with him, but will be once Michael Harris comes back in mid-August. Okay, now I really see this as a legit offense again that can do damage and can go further in the playoffs. All right, so let me break it down a little bit more. What I like about the Solaire addition, what I don't like, and a few things that make me nervous. So again, let's start with the negative. What I particularly don't like about the Solaire addition. Number 1, you really didn't address the Braves' weakness against righties. I do think this is a glaring weakness of this team, and when they face off against teams with really good right-handed pitching in the playoffs, they're gonna struggle, and of course you think, especially against the Phillies, if you're throwing Wheeler and Nola, um, they're gonna have a hard time against those pitchers. Jazz and Winker would have been better options here, but again, you're you did not address that. So Harris being added back to the lineup addresses it some. So I do recognize that one. All right, number two, you added another strikeout prone hitter to a lineup that strikes out a ton. Again, I've already mentioned that one. Number three, you didn't add a stolen base threat. I know I've already mentioned that too, but now I do think Merrifield being added to the second base job, I think that's kind of interesting. I was really hoping Nacho was gonna grab onto that job with Ozzie being out. I still like Nacho long term, but let's be honest, he just didn't hit enough when he was up. Merrifield is a sneaky, interesting pickup to me. He's only 1 year removed from being an all-star, multiple time all-star. He's getting older, but he still has a really good hit tool, singles and doubles kind of hitter, get on base, and definitely steal some bases. So he does provide you with a stolen base threat. And when Harris comes back, you get a little more speed there as well. So I think that's kind of interesting to me until, of course, Ozzie comes back. All right, number four, there are real roster questions created for 2025. This is less worrisome to me, but it's more just interesting to me that now you basically have two primary DHs on your team for 2025. So it really makes me wonder. Now, by the way, I do believe Alex in that they're just comfortable with Solair playing the outfield, but it still really makes me wonder if the Braves are not fully sold on Jared Kelenic. He has been not hitting quite as well the last month or so. So you have 2025 and 2026 in which Solair is going to be on this roster, and so I don't think you platoon Solaire and Kelnick. I don't think you platoon Solaire as like a weak-sided platoon where he's only hitting against lefties or an occasional righty. My best bet, again, all this is kind of fluid, but my best bet is that if Ronald is healthy by the end of spring training 2025, Kelnick gets traded. Solaire probably spends one season in the left field and then maybe moves to DH in 2026 if the Braves let Ozuna go after his contract is up in 2025. We'll see. I mean, they could do other things at that point too. But I really think the last couple months of the season are crucial for Kelnick in terms of his future in Atlanta. 2026, who knows, right? That's kind of far away. But again, maybe you have Harris, Acuna, and Solaire in the outfield, and you do bring back Ozuna. But all of that is still very much in question. So what makes me nervous about the Solaire addition? Number one, Alex's plans this year seem to have just been like, let's just go back to 2021 and recreate the magic with the same players. But that usually doesn't work. It'd be great if it did, but in some ways, to me, this plan lacks some imagination and some freshness. Like a fresh face would have been really cool. Again, I'm not like a huge Jazz Chisholm fan in some ways. I think he's been overhyped in a lot of ways, and yet you see what his addition has done to New York. Of course, it helps that he's hitting home runs, but it's very obvious that he's bringing a freshness to that team. So you've had this season, just to recount it, right? Duvall and Jesse Chavez added in spring training. Rosario added mid-season when he was dropped by the Nationals. Soler and Luke Jackson come back at the trade deadline. Francoeur actually made a joke about it, right? When is Jock coming back? It's like the only guy who they haven't brought back. So I think Alex got all these guys back at a very low price, which is why he went for it. I think he values them more than most of the league does, which is maybe to the Braves' benefit. But that's is the league obviously doesn't value these guys near as much. So, and Eddie and Duvall certainly have not performed at all this season. Uh, and again, the other thing that makes me nervous about the Soler edition is, again, he's streaky and injury prone. So you might hit the lottery with him, or you might go months without him doing much for you. So we're just going to have to see on that one. Okay, so it sounds like I'm being very negative here, but let's talk about what I like about the Solaire addition. Again, at his best, he's probably the best power hitter outfielder that was moved at the deadline. Even though he's streaky, his career numbers are actually better than a couple of the guys I've talked about. So you look at Solaire's career numbers, career 243 hitter with a 330 on base and a 462 slugging percentage. You look at Jazz Chisholm's career numbers, 248 with a 311 on base, a good bit lower, and a 448 slugging, a little lower slugging as well. Winker's career numbers, 263 hitter with a 370 on base. This is why I liked Winker a lot, but a 440 slugging. So he's less of a power hitter. He's more of an on-base guy. Jazz just generally hasn't shown it and doesn't give you much on base. So Solaire, over a pretty long career now, has shown you some really good things. He's proven to be clutch in the playoffs. We all know that, and he fits really well in the clubhouse. And being clutch that's something that's hard to measure and hard to know. Like Winker, maybe he just totally does nothing in the playoffs, or maybe Jazz is too much for him, or whatever, right? So you can feel pretty comfortable with what Soler is going to bring you in a playoff situation. And again, being an on-base guy, I think is really important. And finally, of course, like I said, he's already obviously an upgrade over what you have had. And even if you're looking at career numbers, again, Soler has had the better career compared to Duvall and compared to Eddie. Um, Duvall is a 228 career hitter with only a 287 on base percentage, and a 461 slugging percentage. Eddie, a 262 career hitter with a 299 on base percentage. These guys do not get on base, and a 452 slugging. So slugging percentage, they're all pretty similar, but the on base is where Soler really separates himself. So, guys, ultimately, as a fan, I do really love that Soler is back. I hope that he performs the way he did in 2021. He certainly has it in him, so we're just going to have to see. Now, in the meantime, a huge lift in recent days has been that Matt Olson has finally started hitting. We've been waiting for it all season, and Olson hit 2 home runs back in New York that had me kind of cautiously optimistic, but didn't have me sold that he was back yet because they were off of 2 off-speed pitches. Frank Gore talked about this a lot um, during those games that, okay, this is great, but I need to see him hit a fastball. And in Milwaukee, guys, it happened. And Olson hit 2 home runs in a game in Milwaukee. He went back to back twice with d'Arnaud, which was kind of cool. But both of those home runs were all flat fastballs. And it was really the second home run that had me very excited. He was able to turn on a fastball, 97 miles per hour, hit it out to right center field. I'm like, this could be the most consequential home run for Matt Olson all year. And it had to give him tremendous confidence as well that his timing is back. It was true of Riley too. You got to be able to hit the fastball. And when Riley was struggling, he just could not he could not square up a fastball. Same with Olson. And when Riley started doing that, I'm like, okay, he's back. And now I'm kind of, again, cautiously optimistic that Olson is maybe back. And he certainly has been lately. What, like 5 home runs in his last like 6 games or something like that. So very good stuff from him. And on top of Olson's play, Arcia is starting to hit as well. And this just lengthens the lineup so much with these guys who haven't been doing much all year. Arcia is in the midst of a 12-game hitting streak. Over his last 15 games, he's hitting 307 with a 370 on base percentage, meaning he's being way more selective. And remember, that was the exact opposite of what he was doing before. He was just swinging at everything. So 370 on base percentage. He's providing some power too with 3 home runs during that stretch. Hit one last night. So just really good stuff from Arcia, who, again, he gives you good defense. If he's giving you anything offensively, it's just gravy. So the offense as a whole has looked a lot better too. It's not just these 2 guys. Over the last 7 games, they've hit 21 home runs. It's kind of like been a little glimpse back at last year. Even last night against the Marlins, the first inning, I was like, this feels like a 2023 first inning. 2 home runs, 3 runs scored in the first, immediately jumping on their opponents. Now, they didn't do a whole lot the rest of the game, but that was still really good to see. So, so it's a big positive, and let's take the positive away, right? There hasn't been a lot of positive this year, so let's take the positive, guys. The Braves are within 6 games of the Phillies right now, who are finally slumping a bit. And the Phillies are in the midst of a much tougher stretch of games for them, and are going to be for the next 10 games or so. They've got a tough stretch. The Braves have won 5 out of 6. They're getting healthier. They added Solair, which has lengthened the lineup. And they have a stretch of games in front of them that really they should be able to get back onto some serious winning ways here. The Braves have won 5 out of 6, and maybe they could go on what? Let's do like a 12 out of 14 stretch. That would be awesome. So the next games for them, 3 more against the Marlins, who basically traded away their whole team at the trade deadline. 3 against the Brewers, who are leading their division. But hey, let's take 2 out of 3 against them. 3 against the Rockies, which they're the worst team in the National League. 4 against the Giants, good team, but really should take care of business there. And then 3 against the Angels, another team you should take care of business against. So, that is the stretch for the Braves that I think really sets up well for them. And it all leads into, guess what, a 3-game series against the Phillies. I think that is like August 20th. So, and by then, Michael Harris should be back as well. So I think all this leads up to hopefully the Braves could get, maybe even just get 2 more games on the Phillies. Set up that Phillies series to be, we win that series. Now we really start rolling into September with some real momentum. And so, look, it might not happen. The Braves have this stretch where they should take advantage, but there's no guarantee. They need to beat the teams they should beat. And if they do that, they're going to get back into possibly vying for the NL East. Again, is that the most important thing? No. The most important thing is this team starts playing to its potential. And they really still haven't done that, but they're starting to. They're getting closer, and that's a really positive thing. All right, guys. Well, look, I thank you for tuning in to another episode of State of the Braves. I'll talk to you soon.